Let me tell you a little bit about these guys. Very, very impressive. Mike Elias, Executive Vice President and General Manager of the Baltimore Orioles. He oversees all baseball operations for the club. He's entering his 13th season in Major League Baseball, obviously the first with the Baltimore Orioles. Before joining Baltimore, he served as Assistant General Manager in charge of player acquisition with the Houston Astros. He helped shape our Astros roster that produced back-to-back 100-win seasons, a World Series championship, 2 American League Championship Series appearances, and 2 division titles. Prior to joining the Astros, he spent 5 seasons as a scout with the St. Louis Cardinals, the last 2 years as the club's manager of amateur scouting. During his time with the Cardinals, the club produced a consistently top-ranked farm system and won the 2011 World Series. He's a local boy. He's a native of Alexandria, Virginia, and a 2006 graduate of Yale University, a 4-time letter winner at Yale as a left-handed pitcher for the Bulldogs baseball team. There's a rumor that he threw some heat, but I don't know if that's true or not.
Bad rumor. I'll tell you that.
He was ranked 3rd among the Metro's prospects by the Washington Post back in his high school days, and he was co-rookie of the year his freshman year at Yale. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thank you.
Sig Mejdal, you're going to love his background, I can tell you that. He oversees all aspects of the club's growing analytics efforts while assisting Mike in all of his decisions with the baseball operations. He's entering his 15th season in Major League Baseball and also his first with the Orioles. Before joining Baltimore, he served as a special assistant to the general manager and worked in process improvement with the Houston Astros, and they had a lot of improvement, I can tell you that. He organized the team's analytics department from its inception, and that process helped the Astros improve their season record by more than 50 wins between 2013 and 2017, while also drafting more major league players than any other team during his tenure. During the time with the Astros, he also, same as Mike, won the World Series championship, made 2 American League Championship Series appearances, and won 2 division titles. Prior to joining the Astros, Sig worked for the St. Louis Cardinals for 7 seasons, spending his final season as the team's director of amateur draft analysis. And this is the part that you'll really like. He's a California native. He earns bachelor's degrees in mechanical and aeronautical engineering from the University of California at Davis, as well as master's degrees in operations research and cognitive psychology from San Jose State University. Prior to beginning his baseball career, he worked for NASA as a biomathematician. Sig, welcome here as well.
Thank you.
I got to tell you, when I was at Maryland way back when, and I think Mike Piles will back me up, none of the guys on the team ever went near the engineering department. I want to talk, first of all, Mike, I want to talk a little bit about the culture of the team. You know, one of the things that I'm so impressed with in this early part of the year is you see the hustle, you see the aggressive play. I mean, so many times last year, and you hate to say it, you know, when one of your stars, like Manny Machado, would hit a ground ball to short, and he wouldn't run out to first base, you know, and people, that's how you model it away. That's how it's done with the real big stars. The other guys think they can get away with that too. We often hear about Pete Rose and Charlie Hustle, where he ran out everything. And you're trying to bring that back here to Baltimore. Talk a little bit about that and how you're trying to instill that in the team.
Thanks. Yeah, first of all, I agree with you. It's been a good energy level throughout spring training and into the start of the season, and we'll see. Hopefully we can keep that up throughout the year. But it is a long year, and it's going to be a trying year for a lot of these guys, you know, new to the big leagues. And to maintain that type of energy level over the course of the season is a challenge. But I think they're up for it. They're showing it. I've got to credit our coaching staff, our new coaching staff, led by Brandon Hyde, the new manager, with getting these guys to buy in all throughout spring training camp with the importance of that type of play. And a lot of it is just the fact that they're young and they're hungry for the opportunity that exists here right now, with this being a rebuilding team with a lot of playing time available. But really, we've pushed this message to them, knowing the year that we're coming off of and sort of the narrow opportunities that we have to add talent to the team this year right away. We wanted to get some guys in here that played sharp defense, that ran the bases, played with a little bit of energy, and start there. So we think it's a good first step, but there's certainly a long way to go.
Did that say anything you want to add to that? I mean, do you look for that when you do your analytics? And is that one of the variables that you try to key in on?
It's something that the scouts do, and so it bleeds into the scouts' prognostications of this guy's future defensive skill, the improvement he's going to come with hitting. Right, like if you can't run to first, you're probably not likely going to be working as hard as the other players throughout. And from the draft, like that's such a predictor of who's going to be good is the person who's willing to work at perhaps something that's unpleasant the most. So we rely on the scouts. There's no work hard-o-meter that we could just attach to the players at college.
Do the scouts, have any problem with all your analytics? I know the old school scouts, the movie Moneyball, that really was the essence of your position. But the scouts, they weren't into analytics. They were afraid of their job.
Yeah, and it's changed dramatically. Right, the book was 2003. The movie was a few years after, and those depictions, while fictional, were not too far off from real life. There was a defensiveness, a skepticism, a threat when persons with a background different than themselves came in with ideas that, they weren't staying in their lane. The ideas were often bigger than what a new person should be speaking about. And so there was the whole spectrum, but there was definitely more skepticism and pushback 14 years ago, 15 years ago than you see today.
Talk a little bit about that if you could. I mean, how does a rocket scientist, a biostatistician, how do you get into baseball? You must have loved baseball, I guess. Talk a little bit. How did you get into baseball? I mean, it's a great story.
Yeah, ever since I was a child, I was fascinated with baseball and the statistics. The back of a baseball card could keep me busy for much of the afternoon. Too much of my childhood was spent indoors in California playing table baseball games and keeping statistics and really geeking out. And as I got older, the interest never went away, but I never had the imagination to think that a baseball team would care to hire someone like myself until Moneyball came out in 2003, and then I naively thought I just need to let the teams know I'm willing to relocate and I'm available.
You knocked on a few doors.
Yeah, and I'd have a job by the end of the week. I mean, I literally thought that. But it couldn't be further from the truth, right? I was selling something that their job to some degree depended on not buying it, that we were a threat, at least to their decision-making pie. And so I was selling to the wrong people, but I had no idea about that. So after a year and a half of, unsolicited resumes showing up uninvited at meetings, one of my unsolicited proposals made its way to Jeff Luhnow, who had just been hired by the owner of the Cardinals because the owner had read Moneyball, and it made its way to Jeff's desk, and thankfully he didn't put out a job announcement where more qualified people would have got the job. And so it lined up. I found out where St. Louis was. It's in the middle of the country, just somewhere called Missouri, and moved there.
Fantastic. Mike, a little bit of a tough day yesterday, but the season is a long season to go. Talk a little bit about, what have you uncovered? Do you see any diamonds in the rough, so to speak, on the team right now, or down in the minors as well, that you think that they could really have an impact on the team?
Sure. Well, part of the process that we're going through is we're trying to add talent to the organization from all possible angles. That's really our goal this year. Now, the biggest mode of adding talent is going to be the draft in June. And then in July 2nd, we're going to have an international signing class. It's going to be the biggest one that the Orioles have ever done. This is an area that the Orioles have really lagged on for a number of years. And then possibly later that month at the trade deadline, we might be bringing in some young players via trade. So that's going to be most of the talent. But an important part of this process, too, is you can use your major league roster to add talent. And sometimes when players end up on the waiver wire from other teams because it's a little technical, but they're called out of options. They've been sent to the minor leagues too many times, and now the team needs to get them off their roster and they can expose them to other teams. We have a chance to grab them. And given our situation, we can audition these guys for 2-3 weeks, a month, and give them a little more major league playing time than they've ever gotten before. And most of them are probably going to scuffle. But if we do that 5 or 6 times and we end up with 1 or 2 keepers, it's going to be worthwhile. So that's a little bit of a part of the process that we're going through right now. We did it with the Astros. I do think we're going to end up with a couple of good players out of this process. Some of the young guys that you see on the team now, Dwight Smith, Richie Martin is a Rule 5 pick. Guys like that, I think they have a chance to stick around this organization for a few years and help us. But in the minor leagues right now, we've got some really promising young pitchers, some good outfielders in AAA that'll probably be up here later in the year. So we got some good things going on down there.
So that's the plan then, is just to stock the farm system as best you can and then hope it rises up to the top. And
we have to. Every other team in baseball is trying to do that right now. It used to be that the big market teams, Yankees and the Red Sox, they would kind of skimp in that area and they would just throw money at the major league roster. But nowadays, those older players, they're not playing as well into their 30s for a number of reasons. And these big market teams, they got smart and they started putting together terrific scouting departments, terrific player development departments, investing in those areas. And so now they're richer than we are in Baltimore, but also have all this going for us. So in our market in particular, we have to lay a foundation that will give us a chance to make the playoffs for 5, 6, 7 years in a row, rather than try to cobble something together that might bust out on us in 1 year. So we have to do that. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a lengthy process just because baseball players take a while to get from amateur baseball to the major leagues. But we're committed to it and we're willing to do it. And we have experience doing it, and we also know through experience that it does pay off. So I think once we accomplish this, we're going to enter a very fun golden age of baseball here.
I mean, you heard it here, folks, right here, hopefully in a couple of years. Walk us through the process. You talk about picking up somebody on a waiver wire. You did that with Severino, the catcher. You made a decision to send down Chance Sisco, who had a tremendous spring training. Walk us through that process, and I guess Sig has something to do with the analytics there. Walk us through that. How do you make that decision not to go with the guy who's really, second year up here? He had a little rough year last year, but again, a great spring training. Everything looked good, but you decided not to give him some more seasoning down in the minor leagues.
Well, that was the main thing. We looked at his year last year and the fact that he was still young and the fact that he was still working on his defense, but his AAA stats last year were down. His major league stats last year were down. And in a different situation, we might say, oh my gosh, we need Chance Sisco on the major league team, even if it's not in his best interest. But again, part of our process is prioritizing the development of these players and whatever's best for them individually. And for us, just looking at a guy that had a rough AAA season, well, he needs to go down and work on some things and hopefully graduate from AAA and have a more stable foundation when he does come up here. And then on top of that, in the meantime, like I was saying before, that roster spot now, we have a catcher spot open. We have a chance to grab some catchers from around the league who become available and see what we got. And Pedro Severino, I was talking with Rick Dempsey about him. He's not a great hitter, but he's young and he's a very energetic, excellent defender, and he's helping us out right now. And we'll see if he ends up being a long-term piece or not. But we've got a lot of good catchers right now. We're going to have to figure that out. But the important thing is Chance, is getting in the work that he needs, and when he comes here, he'll be all the better for it.
But there's rumor that's Rick coming out of retirement. Is that true?
He'd like to.
This kid's the best thing I've seen since back in my days, all the catchers around the league. This guy's really got a lot of talent. We developed him, we got some diamonds in talking.
Fantastic. Sig, talk a little bit about that. How does your analytics play into a decision like that? Because I know you're obviously advising with Mike and as well.
Yeah, I think when it comes to spring training, like all these players, like you have so much data on them, no reasonable person would say, hey, let's make a long-term decision based on a tiny sample of practice games. But yet often there's a pressure when what you see in spring training is a belief that these players have genuinely changed. And while that does happen, there's a lot more false alarms than realization of those signals. And so it's often a let's not overreact to what is a small sample of practice games. And if, in this case, if he really has made this imagined step function, well, thankfully he's in our system and it will continue to reveal itself in real games and bigger samples.
So the cream eventually rises to the top, if you will.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
with more samples. Yeah.
When looking at the team, Mike, and I guess Sig too, you know, we're talking about stocking the minor leagues and get as many good players as you can. How far ahead can you plan out? You know, what are you looking towards right now? And from a business perspective, a lot of us look at, 2, 3, 5 years out when we do our strategic plan. You guys doing the same thing with talent? Because talent is a dynamic process. I mean, and I guess and juxtapose that, if you will. You know, a guy getting more, time in the minor leagues. A guy like Manny Machado jumps from Double-A up to the majors. Is that type of jump not going to happen with you guys? Or does a guy look so good that you can't help but bring him up?
Well, with where we're at right now, I don't see us skipping a minor league level for a player this year, just because there's probably not going to be a big hurry to get them to the major league level. Now, as we start turning the corner, eventually that will be the case, and look forward to that, because it's usually fun and it means the player's really good if he's able to do that. But in terms of like the 5-year planning, we're certainly thinking ahead, and the main thing is that we are going to prioritize what's best for this organization in that 4th or 5th year versus what's best for this organization in year 1. And that can be very painful to do sometimes, but it's the way that you do this process successfully, is kind of going through some of that pain. What we don't do in baseball is worry about, okay, what's the exact lineup going to look like 5 years from now? Who's playing short? Who's playing center? Okay, we got him at center. Let's take a right fielder instead, because we already have our center fielder. The sport's a little too unpredictable for that, and we just want to stack assets in our minor league system. And if it happens to be, if we take catchers with our first-round pick the next 2 years, or shortstops with our first-round pick the next 2 years, we're going to do that if we feel they're the best player. That's kind of how you have to approach the baseball draft. And one example of that is when we were in Houston, we took Carlos Correa as a shortstop in 2012. He debuted right around the draft in 2015, and then we used our very first pick on Alex Bregman, who was also a shortstop, and everyone was like, where are these guys going to play? And we were like, we'll figure it out later. We just need to take Bregman. And, we ended up figuring it out. He's playing third base. And the baseball draft is tough enough where you don't want to pass on a superior talent just because you're going for a positional need. So it's a lot different than football in that regard, where you kind of worry about your current roster. We don't do that, and we're not going to do that.
But the draft is so important, because that's where you stock your players. How do you protect yourself, if you will, from unexpected outcomes? Somebody gets hurt. A perfect example is Hunter Harvey. I think he was the #1 pick in 2013 or 2014. Been hurt every year. Finally, they said, "You're looking good. Go ahead and pitch as much as you want." How do you protect yourself, from that occurrence? And unfortunately, the Orioles had not done too well on their high draft picks, probably for the last 5, 6, 7 years. I mean, we've got Dylan Bundy now that was the #1 pick, and he's on the roster. He's pitching, but he's not setting the world on fire. How do you protect yourself?
Well, number one is you do what we're doing now, which is we're going to load up the farm system, because you need so much depth in this sport for injuries, for just variability in these guys' careers, that you want to have backup options. And that's part of the risk in not developing a good farm system, is you've got to have all your players stay healthy and perform perfectly, and that doesn't happen a lot. So we want to lay that foundation of talent. I also think you're going to see this organization do a much better job of developing pitchers, to what you were talking about, that has been done in the past. That's been part of our success in St. Louis and more recently in Houston. We've managed to bring over Houston's pitching coordinator to oversee our minor leagues here, so I think that's going to be terrific. We're going to try to shepherd these guys through the minor leagues as safely as possible. But there's still injuries. It's part of the game, and we need that depth to protect against that.
So what can you add to that, especially from the analytics department, especially with a high draft pick? I mean, your input, I'm sure, is instrumental before Mike pulls the trigger on somebody.
Yeah, I mean, if we had the answer predicting injuries, whoever gets that would be in so much better shape than the rest of the club. So, like, we do our best. I mean, we might have experts analyze their biomechanics. We'll look closely at the medicals. We'll have the team doctors look closely at the medicals. We'll track that biomechanist's prognostications over the years to see what sort of predictive value it has there. We'll be careful with the usage of them in the minor leagues. Some of it is sort of inherent, and for the most part, when a hitter gets injured, catchers aside perhaps, often the career-ending injuries are a fluke, and it's really hard to predict. But for so many pitchers, their careers end with the injury, and so that category of player has a larger risk than the position players. And I think as time has gone on in the draft, you've seen the excitement with pitchers sort of come back down to earth, because at that point in time, there's nothing wrong with him. He hasn't been injured. Oh my gosh, this is a number 1 or number 2 starter. Let's get him. And then 2.5 years later, there's a shoulder injury and he's never the same. While that info was, of course, not available to you at the time, and so you don't often appreciate, I think, just the inherent variability and risk with this category of player.
Talk about pitching again, because you know how vital that is. And I've had this conversation with Rick Dempsey many times. Back in the old day, our day when we were young growing up playing baseball, I mean, pitchers, Cy Young, way back when, used to pitch both ends of a doubleheader. Jim Palmer used to have 15, 17 complete games. You know, Roger Clemens, the same thing. I think in all of baseball last year, you had a couple complete games in the entire major leagues. What's changed? I mean, physiologically, the guys can't do it anymore. I mean, how do you go back from, you know, when Cy Young pitched, when he would, again, pitch both ends of a doubleheader, Babe Ruth, the same type of a thing. Now you got situational guys that pitch for a third of an inning, or maybe a batter, or maybe an inning, and they throw their arm out. What's changed? What's the dynamic?
This was the pitcher, right? With the great stuff.
He was throwing heat. He was.
I played Little League. There was a pitching machine when I pitched, so don't look at me.
Talk about it, Mike.
You know, it's something that we still debate across the industry, even if this is even the right thing that this is going on right now. It's possible that there's some overprotectiveness going on. Everyone's sensitive to injuries, and okay, if we just pitch these guys less, then at least we'll feel less culpable when they do get hurt. I don't know if that's true or not. The fact is the injuries have risen since that time. One theory is these guys are throwing harder. Now, maybe not as harder than the guys that you mentioned who are, you know, cream of the crop Hall of Famers, but just the general population of pitchers is throwing harder. And, you know, all you got to do is look at sprint times and swimming times across the decades, and they just go up, 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 up. So it's probably going on in baseball too, even though we don't have that data in front of us. And when you throw harder, you stress your joints more, unless you're like totally mechanically efficient. So there's that. I think there's also the rank and file pitchers are better now than back then. So like the drop off between Jim Palmer and his bullpen was probably pretty large, but now we've got all these guys throwing 97 from the left side in the bullpen, and you know, different arm angles, and guys from the Dominican Republic, and we have these bullpens that you can deploy very specifically to attack certain hitters, and it's maybe better in some cases than your number 3 starter being out there for an extra couple innings. So a whole bunch of factors going into it. But again, I don't think there's any of us that can say for certain that this is a good thing for the sport or a healthy thing. And I think if we could go back to the days of, you know, having those guys that would throw 8-9 innings every outing, we would do it. But it just doesn't seem to be happening right now. I don't know. You got any theories?
On what he's talking about?
Yeah.
Well, Yeah, I do, as a matter of fact.
You told me the same thing 1,000 times.
Everybody knows I lasted 27 years in professional baseball, and it was a 365-day-a-year job for me, Mike. And the minute we got home, we unpacked in the wintertime, and the first day of the winter was a 7-mile run up and down fire break roads. You see a lot of athletes did it in those days. I did it longer because I came from the track background. But the first day was the 7 miles. The second day was 4 miles of quarters around a regular track in times with a certain amount of time in between each one. Then the third day back to 7 miles, and the fourth day back to your sprint workout, which was 220s. And those things. And what I did talking to the doctors back in those days was to talk about, what good does it really do my heart? It was an endurance sport. In my mind, baseball will always be. You've got to be prepared to play 200 games at least every year. So I never gave up that routine for the 27 years that I played. In fact, longer than that, because in the minor leagues also. But doctors said that the more oxygen you get into your blood, the faster you will heal. I was on the disabled list 2 times that proved it out.
Wow.
Both times with broken hands. Bo Jackson broke my thumb in a collision at home plate, but as you all know, I held it to less yards than Bosworth did. And the other time, John Billett threw at me because I took too hard a swing. But those are the only 2 times. I didn't have leg problems or arm problems. And you talk about a 100-pitch limit in ball games. Well, every other day I would throw 100 balls to second base, 50 to third, and 50 to first. And I felt like the day I retired, I really didn't have to retire at 42. It just wasn't fun for me to sit on the bench as much anymore. But that was it. But the strength and conditioning has changed the outlook, and I think it's something that we as an organization should take a look at because we're paying them phenomenal amounts of money to produce. And if they don't start working out sooner, Mike, and conditioning themselves at doing something baseball related, then we're paying a lot of money for them to get started in January to start taking it seriously because we can't get them to the 5th inning for the first 5 or 6 starts of a baseball season. And I think it hurts the game and makes your job 100 times tougher. And the analytics change.
Stanley.
Yeah, I also think that this sports specialization in all the baseball games they play now, fall ball, spring ball, summer ball, with kids. I mean, I played, 13 years in the NFL. I missed 4 games.
Wow.
I was a 3-sport guy. I taught a track background, You do different things. It just seems to me now that you don't build your athleticism up. You work on the same muscles all the time. Even in football now, there's a lot more injuries than there was before because they don't develop their whole body. All the little muscles that support the big muscles. And I don't know, in baseball, I just see kids that play, hundreds of games a year at 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. And I don't know if they ever develop fully developed athletes, let's put it that way. And that puts strain on certain muscles. And I don't know how long they last. I don't know. I can't tell you Tommy John and all that stuff, why that happens, but it just seems like sports specialization has added more injuries in all the different sports.
Well, you were a catcher too. You played behind Thurman Munson. And Brian, you played as well for the Atlanta Braves.
Yes.
Do you see the conditioning
Well,
going?
I have the best solution for you. You got to go and do what we did. Get Greg Maddox, John Smoltz, and Tom Glavine, and you're set. And then draft Chipper Jones first. So he and I were drafted in the same year. He was the first round pick. I was the 9th round pick. And we came up together through the whole system. So I saw him hit a lot of balls off the wall. If you can do that, it's not that hard.
That's why they got sick.
Yeah, you're right.
Chipper, and then and Javi was the opposite of Sereno. Javi would he would let in. He would drive in more than he let in, but he was more of an offensive guy. But it's I think these guys bring up good points, but
But conditioning, talk about the conditioning when you played in the 90s. And Rick talked about it. It's not this, did you see that? Did you see guys that weren't in shape? I
played with with Mark Lemke, who was smoking cigarettes in
Dugout?
in between. So I think there's a mix. You had people that like Rick who really work really really hard, and you had I had to work really hard to get where I got to because I'm 4 feet tall. So, and
I can appreciate that.
But it was a mix back then. But the guys that were great, the Glavins, Maddox, the Smalls, they were the first ones to spring training. They were the first ones in the work, in the weight room. Now, I don't know what they're doing now, so it's hard to speak of what they're doing now. John Sherholtz and Bobby Cox and those guys were tremendous people to play with. The organization was really a true program from the lower minor leagues all the way to the big leagues. Same signs, same concepts, same everything. It was all together. I think that's why they won 14 divisional championships.
In a row.
It was just every coach, every scout, everybody was all on the same page. It was all about the Atlanta Braves.
Yeah, but you had the credentials. You were ACC Player of the Year, so you were drafted and you performed. That's the name of the game. Guys, talk a little bit about the business side of baseball, and as well as the baseball side. How do those two coexist? I mean, you'd love to draft as many people as you can. You'd love to do as many international signings as you can, but there's a finite number of dollars. How do those two sides of the operations work together?
Yeah, it's a big reality in the business, and especially in a market like ours, which isn't huge. There really are finite resources, and because of that, you want to spend the dollars in the most efficient way possible. And when you look at what that is, it's not even close. It's the draft in the international market, and the fact that we have a draft, and the fact that the international signings are contained by Major League Baseball into a certain number of dollars that each team's allowed to spend really makes those dollars, like $1 worth $15 in the free agent market up here. So a team that forces itself out onto the free agent market that doesn't have hundreds and hundreds of millions like the Yankees do, eventually you're going to sputter out and run out of runway to compete with those guys. So we really need to do as best we can in those areas, but also strategically spend dollars on infrastructure, player development, strength and conditioning, academies in Latin America, that type of stuff. And those dollars add up too. So it is challenging. It's something that analytics too is becoming very expensive. His staff and the IT technology that they need, these aren't cheap things. So we sit down as a group and we have to make, like you guys do, have to make very tough decisions about how to invest every dime that we have.
I'm going to ask one more question, and we're going to open it up to the audience. With that in mind, with SIG and his analytics and his department, what do you do, and how do you gain a competitive advantage? Because it's not like nobody knows what you guys are doing. Moneyball's out there. Other people, I'm sure, just like in Houston, you have people like you, SIG. How do you gain a competitive advantage? How do you gain one step ahead of the other teams in the marketplace?
Yeah, when I first came in, when Jeff Luhnow hired me in 2005, it was much easier. I was the fourth analyst in baseball, so that meant the vast majority of teams were not using this at all. So at that point, it was just convincing a single decision maker to evaluate players a bit differently. And whatever that inefficiency was from not using all the information available, with only 3 other analysts in baseball, like we were at the buffet table by ourselves. We got to enjoy that entire inefficiency. But now there's about 350 analysts.
Wow.
So maybe you'll get some cheese toast or something, left over. It's a different world. So much of our energies are spent on asking that exact question. And a few years ago in Houston, as the amount of analysts were coming in, the GMs and the scouting directors, their backgrounds were changing, and they were much more data appreciative, that we looked at the player development system. And instead of just evaluating players differently and bringing in players that had a better chance, we were actually intruding on the process and trying to develop the players we had better. And that was an inefficiency 4 or 5 years ago, but that is quickly disappearing. And so we're looking, and I think like any industry, as time goes on, the inefficiencies get smaller and smaller. They last shorter amounts of time, but that's still all there is. And so if there's new technologies that are sort of bleeding edge, not ready for prime time, we feel a responsibility. We got to pay attention to these with the hopes that next season or the year after that, that they will provide us with something that we could take advantage of before the rest of baseball does.
Gotcha. Well stated. Charles.
You guys are doing a good job and everything, but we've always, for the last several years, had a real bad farm system. And you're adding players and everything. How long do you think that we're going to go through this, getting clobbered every game? How long do you think, because it was 14 years we went through the losing. How long do you feel that with the analytics and you bringing up players and getting more players, how long do you think that we're going to be a pretty good team?
A great question.
So I've been very dexterously avoiding putting a number on this in every interview, so I'm not going to stop now, but thank you. But it won't be 14 years. If it is, it's going to be 2 other people sitting up there long before then. And the farm system, we're going to get that turned around fast. Now, it's going to take a couple of drafts, but in all, as much modesty as possible, this is kind of our forte. We do the draft and player development as well as anyone, and we're going to get those systems and processes and philosophies installed very quickly. And once we have the minor leagues kind of filled in with a baseline of talent that we feel is going to sustain a good playoff run here, then you will start to see us be able to shift some resources towards the major league team, and hopefully some contracts that are on the books right now will be coming off, but also have the talent ready to supplement, because you can't go out and buy 9 free agents. It's not affordable. And so if we have 4 or 5 players coming up from the minor leagues, we'll be ready to go. But I mean, to answer your question, it's years, not decades.
Blake.
So if you could talk a little more on the physio. Rick Dempsey was talking about running and how it can really oxygenate the blood. But it's counterintuitive to me that with all the technical knowledge that you have, either through statistics or advanced equipment, that the injuries would be increased. I think there's something missing there in the whole puzzle. And just to give you a quick example, years ago I was friends with Mike Flanagan, and I noticed he was wearing a tight shirt that the whole left side of his body was filled up because he was a left-handed pitcher. And I mentioned it to him just politely. He's a wonderful guy. He didn't have any problem with it. But he actually went and started doing some lat pull-downs. But nobody on the Oriole team at that time had suggested that to him. I'm assuming that with the analytics, the training is getting more sophisticated. It just doesn't quite make sense to me.
Can you summarize that for the tape, that question?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. It's I would describe it as the sports science world kept up with the latest technologies, the latest processes that are out there? And my answer would be no, that the baseball player development system has not been, just traditionally has not been something that has been as well funded as it should. I mean, they could probably describe like what they were eating coming up in the minor leagues is probably a lot of peanut butter and jelly and fast food, and no reasonable person thinks that's the best way to create a state-of-the-art baseball player, but yet, as recently as just a few years ago, that's what 30 organizations pretty much were doing. So if you can imagine analysts had just come into baseball, that the sports scientists are now starting to come into baseball, and that's the similar change with decision-making. Now it's going to be a change with the strength and conditioning and the training methods, and it's going to, I would argue it's going to be a similar paradigm shift of the experienced persons reevaluating how they were doing things, taking advantage of the latest techniques and processes.
It's not happening now. There's not a lot of physical trainers there.
Some organizations are. at Houston, we have such a reputation of being so advanced. We had one sports scientist, so it's still new. And I think if you think of it with the budgets, okay, we're getting an analyst, we need a database guy, okay, another analyst. They're keeping busy. It took a little bit of time before the biggest need and those making the arguments were for sports scientists. But it's something that it's inevitable. You'll see it in baseball. But I always describe, like when you see some of those documentaries on Olympians where they're bobsledders or bicyclists and everything is measured and there's a team of scientists and no detail is overlooked, their nutrition, their max VO2, everything like that is not what's going on in the development of baseball players, but in time, it will.
Hirsch.
The big question, Chris Davis.
You had to bring it up, didn't you?
How do you explain what's happening and what's being done to maybe solve it medically, physically, mentally? There's something going on here. Because he's obviously had such a wonderful track record, and he's obviously earnest and wants to perform. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, a downturn in performance as extreme as the one that he has undergone, I think that it's not going to be just one variable that has caused this. There's a number of things going on at once to get something this extreme. All I can tell you is we're thinking about it around the clock and trying to come up with ideas to work on it. One of the big challenges is just the rules of baseball and the calendar of baseball is we would love to be doing this away from the major league competition that goes on a nightly basis, but there's no real way to do that. And so it makes it very difficult, especially this time of year. Now you get around to the winter time, it's a little different, but this time of year, there's only so much that you can change about a hitter when he's got to go out and play every night. But we're taking a look at it. We're going to try everything we can, but it's a challenging situation. I know that he's feeling it, and all of us are. But it's going to be a lot of work.
Ron.
Can you compare where the Astros were when you started there and where we are this year, and kind of the work that you got for them?
It's
Great question.
It's very similar and very different. It's very similar in that the analytics were not a priority with either organization. Where it's different is the rest of baseball. So 7 years ago, what the other teams were doing is a lot different what the other teams are doing today, that the sea level has raised, but yet the Orioles were immune to many of those processes. So that describes both the opportunity, like undoubtedly what we're good at, and introducing that to the Orioles is going to help them. But the competition is not just watching baseball games and doing nothing. They're doing the same thing, and they have been for the 7 years since we've come to the Astros.
Brian.
So, baseball looks so much easier from my living room when I was 20. So many 0 for 4s. I had a full head of hair before.
Frank, where's Frank Weinstein? Full head of hair.
So Frank delivered my brother, actually. Yeah, before he changed his career. And there's 31 other teams out there, getting drilled by their respective cities too. It's really hard. I think that the key is, you just want to be kind of in the mix at the end. I mean, that's really the key, because anything can happen if you're in the mix. You're not predicting world championships. You're not predicting, you just want to be in the mix, and that's it, right? But so getting back to Chris Davis, I can't imagine that the hitting coaches and maybe other people involved are not going through the normal working on hitting the ball the other way, getting on top of the ball. I mean, I everything possible. And I'm not looking at results as much as I'm looking at approach. And I just look at the approach and the effort to try to accomplish the end goal. And I don't see that from where I'm sitting, just watching the games or going or whatever. I'm just wondering, like, the first thing I would do is I would make him in the game hit the ball, a hard ground ball to the shortstop every time, and just keep attacking the inside of the ball, attacking the inside of the ball. And, I can't imagine they're not working on it. I mean, I would assume that that's happening. And then what's the disconnect from that? I don't know how much you can speak about that or not, but where is the disconnect? And is it like I'm trying to get 20 hits in one at bat and hit the ball 700 feet because I feel so much pressure to do that, as opposed to just get back to basics, flatten your swing out, and get through the ball and stop getting on and off it so quick. I'm just wondering, as far as, what can you speak of that a little bit?
Yeah, without getting into too many specifics about where we're at with the program with him, I think one thing that I thought was going to be maybe a little bit of an advantage and has turned out to cost us some time maybe is everybody's new now. So new hitting coaches, we're new manager, and we haven't benefited fully from the history of, okay, we tried this, it didn't work, we tried this, it didn't work, we tried this, it didn't work. So we're having to kind of maybe go through some of those processes a little bit with them. But all I can say is we're going to keep trying. I mean, he's on the team. And
we're rooting for him.
Yeah, everybody's rooting for him.
We wish him the best.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've always been confused by this analytics stuff. Do you have a model where you have certain variables to compare each player, or do you look at each player and say, these are the variables that are important? How does this guy stack up?
Yeah, I think the best way of explaining it is if you put yourself in the shoes of a scouting director, he's getting so much information about this player. This expert, this scout is saying, his hitting for average is a 60, his hitting for power is a 55. I think he could be a fringe shortstop. His base running is this. But you're also having these other attributes. This was his batting average, his OPS, his slugging, at Stanford this year. This was what it was in the summer the year before. This is his age. This is his height. This is his psych test score. So you have a wealth of these attributes, and they're not all pointing in the same direction, of course. And so in the past, the scouting director would sort of have to do some really complex mental math and come up with a preference of who he liked better, but no human being could do this complex multi-attribute exercise in his head. And so analytics was simply doing what he would do in his head, but doing it mathematically. So, right, if this matters, if the scout's description of the player's makeup matters, well, then players who have had a good description of a positive description of makeup in the past would have done a little bit better than those that don't. And it's that thinking and a retrospective analysis that could give you some insights into how to weigh all these leading economic indicators. And then, right, few things have been as well recorded as what takes place on the baseball field. Like, what a shame not to try to take advantage of that information and then convince the decision maker that this is something that he should anchor his decisions to. And that's it. You don't have to mention neural nets or artificial intelligence. It's just sort of taking the math out of the head.
Ken?
Yeah, when you set up your prediction equation, I hear you putting in athletic statistics data. How about personality variables and psychological factors? Does that go into your predictive equation?
Yeah, we'll put in astrological readings, if we could. Yeah, so there's no shortage, but we let real life and real data reveal what's important. So yeah, so we'll have psychological readings from either in-person interviews. The Major League Scouting Bureau gives a paper and pencil online test. We'll ask those that are close to the player, and we'll put those will be columns of information in the mix. And if it is of value, if we could sense something of this person that in retrospect actually led to an increased performance, we'll use it.
One follow-up question.
Yeah.
How do those, so if you think of them as soft measures, psychological, how well do they predict compared to the athletic data?
So it's a huge question, and it's something that whoever can come up with a breakthrough here, I think will have a lot of advantage, not only in baseball, but in any endeavor you're predicting human behavior. And it's tough because in order to glean this info, so we're in the draft, we're dealing with like 2,000 baseball players, right? And you send different humans, different scouts to maybe interview them. And in some cases, as if it's a first-round pick, it's going to be an hour-long interview in the kid's house. You hear his whole life story. If it's a possible 14th round pick, you might spend, 5 minutes shaking his hand at the fence line and getting to know his name and maybe meet his mom and dad real quick. And you have different scouts doing this. And some guys that will interview a player, and the player will say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, be very polite. It seems like somebody that he'd like his daughter to marry. And he'll come back to the scouting director and say, this kid's got great makeup. I loved him. Makeup is the term that we use in the scouting world for what you're talking about. But that's not really what makes you a good athlete or a good baseball player. You think about somebody like Pete Rose. You probably wouldn't want your daughter to marry him. but he has some of the best makeup of all time. One of the grittiest, most competitive, toughest, hardest working people. And so it takes scouts, just like it takes some scouts are better at assessing baseball than others, there's others that have better instincts about what's in a player's soul than others. So we try to, then we'd have to scout the scouts. And so it's a real dirty stream of data. There's not a lot of clarity to what we're looking at. So we try different things, and nobody has this figured out, I can promise you that. And we think about it a lot.
Marty.
So you talked about the small market. We hear about this all the time. We can't compete with the Yankees in Boston, how much they're spending. And how do you level that playing field? Obviously, football went to a profit share, which changed things a whole lot on that level. Would baseball ever do something like that, or what do we do? Do we just sit and say, well, we can't compete with those guys, so we'll do the best we can and go from there?
Well, I hope that I root for them to continue to figure out revenue parity. I think incrementally over the years they've done that, but our system is old. It's older than football's. We have a much stronger players union than other sports do, and so it's really hard to make sweeping economic changes in baseball. I don't think that we can't compete with them. What I was saying is we can't compete with them dollar for dollar on the free agent market. So what we have to do is compete with them, focus on competition with them in the areas where Major League Baseball has kind of drawn a line, a little artificial sandbox, and say this is how much you're allowed to spend internationally, this is how much you're allowed to spend in the draft. And they have done that. And so if we go head-to-head with them in those areas and get a little bit better than them in those areas, and then spend smartly in infrastructure and don't get tempted into the free agent market in stupid ways, then we will have as good a chance as we can possibly have against teams that big. But the reality of it is, Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and Baltimore and Cleveland, they don't have it the same as LA and New York. It's just how it is. So that's why we need to take a strategy like this.
Jack.
Without getting too personal, what are some of the line items in your bonus program?
In our
Your bonus, your end of the year performance plan, bonus plan. What are some of the line items?
Getting a little personal now, aren't we?
Sig's got one for fielding questions like this instead of
Yeah. All right. A follow-up? Yeah. No, nobody's tenured in baseball. Like we'll be judged by our wins and losses, by our player development rankings, and
playoffs.
This is a wonderful job, and so we're paying close attention to that, and that's our job security.
Do you guys see a change? Football contracts aren't guaranteed. Obviously, there's a huge contract we've been talking about for the last couple minutes too. Do you see that ever changing, where you pay for performance, and you pay for performance proactively rather than retrospectively?
Yeah, again, the players union, has done a good job over the years in baseball of veering the system towards guaranteed money. And I think if the football players could, they would do that, but they just haven't been able to institute it. And so because we are in a system where the players get guaranteed contracts more often than not, we need to be very wise about doing our best to predict future performance rather than basing our investments off of past performance that might not carry over into the next contract, because you can't just walk away from the contract if it's not working out. And so it just puts a little more pressure on us in the front office not to screw up.
Stanley.
Talk about the waiver system. You said that's when you're going to add a lot of players. You hope to add some players to the waiver system. Does it go in reverse order of last year's standings? And does that change at any point during the season to this year's standings? And then as far as sending some of those players down, did service time have any part of that decision where you wanted them not to build up their major league service time to become eligible for arbitration and free agency and things like that?
Yeah, that one first, no. And that's become a big topic in the news because guys like Chris Bryant and these big cases where it's like, okay, why isn't he on a team? And I understand that, and it's kind of created a media. They're always looking for this now, but no, we had a bunch of players who had nice springs, but either didn't play in AAA at all or played badly when they were in AAA. And like Sig was saying, we're not going to, even though we're happy that they had these great springs and everyone saw the great springs and got excited by it, to sit there and say we're going to take the 20 at-bats that happened in Florida in exhibition games and ignore the 370 that happened last year in Norfolk, which we have a very specific translation of what those AAA at-bats probably mean in the major leagues. We're just not going to do that, and we're going to err on the side of developing the players. If they're ready, they're going to play well in AAA, and then we'll bring them back up. The waiver wire, I don't want to put the whole audience to sleep talking about the waiver wire, but yeah, we have the number one pick. We have, and then at some point, I think it's a month into the season, they check the standings again and reset it. So whatever team has the worst record, I think it's a month. It'll change, but right now, because of our season last year, we have the first claim for a while, for a few weeks.
Final question. Steven.
So are there any, so when you look back at your tenure, are there metrics today that are more relevant than others as far as how the weighting of how you're approaching your analysis? And then the second question is there another, is there like like a governing body over analysts to make sure that we are adhering to sort of standardized benchmark?
Well, the second one, like, no, there's no body ensuring that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's and double checking. No, I think that's right. That's up to all your companies how rigorous you are with your quality assurance and your testing. Often with small departments, like there isn't an additional department double checking this department that many teams don't have. As far as the different metrics, yeah, I would answer that like there's new metrics. So radar technology, you've probably seen on the TV broadcast where they'll talk about the spin rate or the movement of a pitch, to the inches or to the RPMs. That wasn't available when I started in baseball. And so, of course, that has tremendous predictive ability. It reveals something about the pitch that was invisible to human perception. And you get it for every team, every game, every pitch at every level. So it's millions of pitches. And so there are quite a few insights you could garner from that we were blind to a decade ago. And yeah, that's something that has a much bigger voice, and it's cutting into sort of just the general counting statistics. We could now sort of say, yeah, this pitcher, this works in college or in low A, but we know it's going to catch up to him in double A, and then it will be of no value in the major leagues. Well, before we sort of saw the success, and we were like, well, why not him? So now we know why not him a lot better.
Everybody support our Orioles. I know Kevin bought a party box for a suite at the stadium.
Nice.
You know, get some tickets. There are boxes available. Let's hear it for Sig, Mejdal, and Mike Elias.
Guys, thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Great job.
Thank you.
See you next meeting, everybody.